Welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. My name's Bob, and in this series of videos we're going to be looking at some of the new features in SAP HANA SPS 10. In this series of videos we'll be looking at some of the new features related to modeling. And in this video we'll be looking at unioning data within calculation views using the web-based development workbench. Now, unioning data sets in calculation views isn't new in SAP HANA. You're able to do it within the SAP HANA Studio. What is new is the ability to do it in the web-based development workbench. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of tables in our catalog. So we're going to load two tables which contain the same type of data. So I'm going to launch a SQL console. And what I'm going to do is I'll paste in that data set. So you can see here that we have two different tables that we're creating. They're both employee tables. You can see this table, employees, has three columns: ID, name, and role. Here's an example of on line 9 of an insert statement. So you can see I'm inserting an ID, the name Sally, and then a job title. We're going to load a second table which is called more employees and obviously contains data which has the same structure. And of course we're going to be unioning these two data sets together. So if I execute this statement and then if I go and look at the data, I'll close that window, I'll go into my catalog, and if I go into the SHA schema and expand my list of tables, we should see that we've got employees and more employees. And of course, if I right click and open the content there, you can see that list of employees. So of course, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to union these two data sets in a calculation view. So of course, we build those calculation views in our editor. So I'm going to go back to the web-based development workbench and launch the editor. And again, the new feature is that we can do this in the web-based development workbench. So I've already got a package here called SHA with some calculation views and objects. I'm going to build a new one called Union. So it's a new calculation view. I'll call this Union. Now it's going to be, the data category is going to be dimension because I don't really have any measures. And then I'll click on OK. So you can see here the object's created union.calculationView. So this is what it looks like. Again, this isn't new. It was existed in SPS 09, the previous release. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to union those two data sets. Of course, this object's new, so I'm going to create the union by selecting that object from the palette. We've got an object which I'm going to rename to union. And then I'll add the two sources. So we can add them here with the green icon, or I can add them here. So if I select add, I'm going to search for employee. So if I do a search for employee, it should find those two tables. I'll add both tables and click OK. So of course, if I look at one of the tables, this is the schema for one of the tables. So if I double click and I drag that to the output, we can see that these are the output columns: ID, name, and role. Luckily for us, I can now, from the other source, select the other column. So if I select ID, name, and role, just like the SAP HANA Studio, you can see the mapping between the two columns. Of course, now to join the union to the projection, I just drag like so from the arrow pointing out, and I'll go to that union. We've got those three columns, which I'm going to output all of them by selecting the topmost object, which is the name of the data source. And then if I go to my semantics, you can see that we've got those dimensions. So of course, all I need to do here is save. This of course will activate as well. And lastly, we can execute, we can run that calculation view. If you get any form of error at the bottom about insufficient privilege, don't worry, just go back to your properties. And all you have to do is say, well, I'm not using any privileges. And you might want to select your default schema. So for me, of course, my default schema is SHA. Once you've done that, all you need to do is again save and activate. and run the calculation view. And there you can see there we've combined obviously the first 5 rows from the employees table and then the second 5 rows from the more employees table. But let's take it a step further and combine data from a disparate data source. In my example, it's going to be Hadoop. So I'm going to go back to my catalog. I'm going to launch a SQL console and I'm going to execute the following select statement. So this is going to create a remote source called Spark_RDS using the Spark adapter. We've covered this Spark adapter in another series of videos called the SAP HANA Spark controller within the SAP HANA SPS 10 series of new videos. So this is simply going to create a connection. All the work's been done, so I'll execute this command. And then when I've done that, all I need to do now is actually go and create the virtual table. So the point I'm trying to show here is that we can actually connect to disparate data sources. So again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go expand. This is a list of those objects in that remote source, and there's a table here called employee. I'll right click and I'll say this is going to be a new virtual table. This is going to go inside my schema, which is SHA, so I'm going to change this to Spark employee, change this to SHA and click on OK. So now to check that we've got data, if I scroll back up and minimize my remote sources, if I go into here and refresh my list of objects, we should have another object called Spark employee. And of course, if I open up the content, this is what it contains. So there we can see a whole list of employees. So the process is exactly the same. Don't really need to do anything else. If I close this window, at the moment you can see we've got 10 rows in that union calculation view. But of course now if I go back to the union, all I need to do is add in that other source by selecting the plus button. I'll do a search for Spark. It finds the Spark employee table or virtual table. I'll click OK. And then just like before, all we need to do now is do the mapping. So if I go down, of course, I've got a column which is employee ID, which is going to link to the ID. So I'll map that like this. Then we've got first name. If I scroll right to the top and choose first name, like so. And lastly, we've got the role, which I'll select. Here we've got position title. Of course, all I need to do is save and activate. Don't need to change anything else because we're using the same columns, the same structure, and then I will execute that or run that calculation view. So of course now we can see the combination of that data source in Spark as well as the data source in SAP HANA, and we've unioned the data sets. To show that it works, what I'll do is I'll select the current select statement. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see that's the name of the select statement. So I'll just copy this and I'll go back to my catalog. I'll open up a new SQL console. I'll paste in that syntax. But what I'll do is I'll do an order by the ID descending, and then it'll be clearer. So if I do an order by ID and do DESC and I'll say obviously I'll take all of the rows. There we go, and I'll execute. Of course, there we can see that data set, and if I just maximize this, what we'll see there, of course, is that these were the 10 rows in the SAP HANA dataset, and going down, you can see how the role actually dramatically changes. You can see how Chris is a store temporary stocker, so on and so forth. So I hope you enjoyed that video where I showed you how we can union data sets within calculation views of both SAP HANA and non-SAP HANA, which is a new feature when doing it in the web-based development workbench in SAP HANA SPS 10.